Happy Wednesday, Mount members and friends. Thank you for joining us for week 6 of our Soul Care and African American Practice Bible Study. As is our custom, we're asking you before we get too far into our discussion today that you share any social media links that we have with persons that are connected with you. We're doing the best that we can to share with you, and we want you to help us to magnify this voice by sharing the links that we have with people that you are connected with. So if you can share YouTube or Facebook or Twitter, that'd be great. If you can encourage people to get on Dialpad, that would be great. Even after, if you're not watching this live, even after, repost it, reshare it, send it out to folk. If you think that today's message has been helpful. And right now you can send out a text to invite people to join us. Now, since the beginning of February, we've been strongly encouraging you to join us for our after Bible study chats. We committed during the month of February, and we're carrying it over throughout the month of March, which is National Women's History Month, to educate you on persons who have been really involved in progressing the movement of the African American community. And so hopefully these discussions have every week encourage you to learn more about those who have done much for us as a people. So join us after this discussion. And again, you can download the Dialpad Meetings app, Dialpad Meetings app, or you can just go to meetings.dialpad.com/SMZBC. If you don't feel like doing that, you don't want to download the app, you don't want to go to meetings.dialpad.com/SMZBC, you can simply call 804-203-9011. Now, this is for those of you who are watching by way of YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter. those of you who are already on dial pad, all you need to do is hang on at the end. Many of us are familiar with the biblical story or the biblical character Esther. And we here at Six Mount Zion Baptist Church kind of studied Esther extensively a few years ago. And so we did a deep dive into her story. We don't have time to do that right now. But the book of Esther is a really intriguing book with a really great storyline, a lot of drama in it. So if you've not read it, I encourage you to go and take some time to read it. In the book of Esther, we read about the beautiful Jewish wife of the Persian king. And we hear extensively about her cousin Mordecai and his move to try to persuade the king to retract an order for the general wiping out, annihilation of Jews throughout the empire. That's a short version. All right. The massacre had been plotted by the king's chief minister, Haman. Now, members, you remember Haman and all that goes and went with him. And the date decided by casting lots of the annihilation. Instead, after much going back and forth with dreams and all of this other stuff, Haman was hanged on the gallows he built for Mordecai. And on the day planned for their annihilation, the Jews destroyed their enemies. This is the point I want to get to. The most popular verses in the book of Esther are found in the 4th chapter, verses 13 through 16. The NIV says, Mordecai sent back this answer, quote, "Do not think that because you are in the king's house, you alone of all the Jews will escape. For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place, but you and your father's family will perish. And who knows but that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this." Then Esther sent this reply to Mordecai, quote, "Go, gather together all the Jews who are in Susa and fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days or 3 nights, and I and my attendants will fast as you do. When this is done, I will go to the king, even though it's against the law. And if I perish, I perish." And we decided to throw that in so we can get some biblical context to the people that we are going to look at and discuss today. We believe that these women have the same mindset of Esther. They ended up counting the cost, and they decided that they were willing to die for the fight for freedom. Dr. Kenneth Jenkins, professor in the Department of African and Afro-American Studies at the University of North Carolina, shares the following. When most Americans think of the civil rights movement, they have in mind a time span beginning with the 1954 Supreme Court decision in Brown versus Board of Education, which outlawed segregation, or they think about the 1955 Montgomery bus boycott. And they think of the many other things, whether it's Selma or Birmingham. But they think the movement culminates in the late 60s or early 70s. He says the movement encompassed both ad hoc, local groups, and established organizations. One being the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, that's NAACP. The Congress of Racial Equality, that's CORE. The Southern Christian Leadership Conference, SCLC, and the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. Now, these groups may not have seen eye to eye on their strategies and tactics, and truth is, most of the time they did. But because they included members from different classes and backgrounds, the movement shared the overall goal of eliminating the system of Jim Crow segregation and the reform of some of the worst aspects of racism in American institutions and in life. And so today, during this National Women's History Month, we like to highlight a few of those women who were instrumental in these organizations. Ella Jo Baker was born on December the 13th, 1903, just down the road in Norfolk, Virginia. Growing up in North Carolina, she developed a sense for social justice early on, due in part to her grandmother's stories about life under slavery. As a slave, her grandmother had been whipped for refusing to marry a man chosen for her by the slave owner. Her grandmother's pride and resilience in the face of racism and injustice continued to inspire Miss Baker throughout most of her life. Ella Baker's maternal grandparents bought, lived on, and cultivated land that was formerly a part of the plantation on which they were enslaved. They bought the land for $250, which they paid off in installments. This purchase was the source of great pride for their family, and they went on to become successful farmers. Baker studied at Shaw University in Raleigh, North Carolina. As a student, she challenged school policies that she thought were unfair. After graduating in 1927 as the class's valedictorian, she moved to New York City and began joining in on social activist organizations and their work. In 1930, she joined the Young Negroes Cooperative League, whose purpose was to develop black economic power through collective planning. She involved herself with several women's organizations. She was committed to economic justice for all, and once said, quote, "People cannot be free until there is enough work in this land to give everybody a job," unquote. Ella Baker began her involvement with the NAACP in 1940. She worked as a field secretary first, and then served as director of branches from 1943 to 1946. Inspired by the historic bus boycott in Montgomery, Baker co-founded the organization In Friendship to raise money to fight against Jim Crow laws in the Deep South. In 1957, Baker moved to Atlanta to help work with Martin Luther King and others as they formed this new organization, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. She also ran a voter registration campaign called Crusade for Citizenship. Ella Baker was instrumental in the first few years of work with the conference. She even, for a while, was given the opportunity to lead the SCLC as an executive director. Ella Baker was one of the most forthright leaders in the movement. Not just forthright woman, but forthright leaders in the movement. Baker did not have any qualms at all with telling Martin Luther King Jr. and his leaders when she felt like they were going in the wrong direction. She stood up for what she believed in. And Baker really was one of the most significant voices in Atlanta during the time of the formation of the SCLC. In February of 1960, a group of black college students from North Carolina A&T refused to leave a Woolworth's lunch counter in Greenboro, where they had been denied service. Baker left the SCLC after the Greenboro sittings. She wanted to assist the new student activists because she viewed young emerging activists as a resource and an asset to the movement. Ms. Baker organized a meeting at Shaw University for the student leaders of the sit-ins in April 1960, and from that meeting, SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, was born. Adopting the Gandhian theory of nonviolent direct action, SNCC members joined with activists from CORE to organize the 1961 Freedom Ride. For those of you who may want to do a deeper dive, it was Ella Baker who continued to make sure that these young people were organized, were focused. And she loved working with younger people more than she did LCLC and adults, because sometimes it seemed like they were more committed to the cause than to all of the other things that came along with it. SNCC in 1964 created the Freedom Summer, an effort to focus national attention on Mississippi's racism and to register more black voters. And Ms. Ella Baker and many others believed that voting was one key to freedom. Today, that's still the case, because if we don't exercise our collective voice, we are unable to influence policies and laws that impact our lives. To be counted, we must be heard. I'll wrap up by saying this. With Ella Baker's guidance and encouragement, SNCC became one of the foremost advocates for human rights in the country. Ella Baker once said, quote, "This may only be a dream of mine, but I think it can be made real." Ella Baker's influence was reflected in the nickname she acquired, Fundi, a Swahili word meaning a person who teaches a craft to the next generation. Ella Baker continued to be a respected and influential leader in the fight for human and civil rights until her death in December of 1986. Diane Judith Nash was born on May 15, 1938. She is an American civil rights activist and a leader and strategist of the student wing of the civil rights movement. Diane's father fought in World War II. Her mother worked as a key punch operator during the war, leaving Nash often in the care of her grandmother. After the war, her parents divorced. Her mom remarried, this time to a member of the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters, one of the most powerful black unions in the nation at the time. Nash says that her grandmother didn't discuss race often because she often believed that racial prejudice was something that was taught to younger generations by their elders. Her grandmother's words and actions instilled Diane with confidence and a strong sense of self-worth, while also creating a bit of sheltered environment that left her vulnerable to the severity of racism in the outside world as she grew older. Growing up, Diane Nash attended Catholic schools and at one point even considered being a nun. After graduating high school in Chicago, Nash went to Washington, D.C. to attend Howard University. After a year, she transferred to Fisk University in Nashville, where she majored in English. There, she was first exposed to the full force of Jim Crow laws, Jim Crow customs, and their effect on the lives of blacks. Nash recounted her experience at the Tennessee State Fair when she had to use the colored woman's restroom, signifying the first time she had ever seen and been impacted by segregation signage. Outraged by the realities of segregation, Nash became a full-time activist. In spring 1960, nearly 200 students involved with the nationwide sit-in movement arrived in Raleigh. Nash at the time was only 22. There, the SCLC, which we just finished talking about, at Ella Baker's request, sponsored this students' meeting. Dr. King envisioned a SCLC student league, but Ella Baker advised the youth to remain autonomous and follow their own principles. Accordingly, in April of that year, Nash was one of the founders of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, SNCC, independent of any adult organizations. She quit school. She led its direct action wing. Her family was confused, unaware that you could actually do civil rights work as a job. SNCC would go on to become involved with some of the most important campaigns of the civil rights era, which I just mentioned, adding a fresh and active youth voice to the movement. In '61, Nash and 10 fellow students were arrested in Rockville for protesting segregation. Once jailed, they would not accept the chance for bail. Originally fearful of going to jail, Nash was arrested dozens of times for her activities. In '62, although she was 4 months pregnant with her daughter, and she was married to James Bevel, who was also a King Lieutenant in SCLC. She faced a 2-year sentence in Mississippi for contributing to the delinquency of minors when she had encouraged them to become freedom riders and ride on the buses. During her pregnancy, she was ready to serve her time with the possibility of her daughter being born in jail. Nash took the weight of this possibility seriously, spending 2 days praying and meditating, but before coming to a decision and penning an open letter. Quote, I believe that if I go to jail now, it may help hasten that day when all my children and all children will be free. Not only on the day of their birth, but for all their lives, unquote. Diane Nash, Bevel, or Diane Nash, was sentenced to 10 days in jail in Jackson, Mississippi. Nash will go on to serve many roles for SNCC and then for SCLC. Though years later, Nash is clear about how she saw herself in relationship with King and other clergy, stating, I never considered Dr. King my leader. I always considered myself at his side, and I consider him at my side. I was going to do what the Spirit told me to do, so if I had a leader, the Spirit was my leader. She later cut ties with SCLC, questioning their leadership structure, not too different than Ella Baker, who did the same thing. She often questioned their male and clergy-dominated ranks. She would also quit or split from SNCC in 1965 when their directives changed under Stokely Carmichael's leadership. Some of you all may know that SNCC became very rebellious under Stokely Carmichael. And Stokely Carmichael and a couple other brothers started the Black Power movement, the Black Panther movement, and the Black Power movement, but it came through leaders who were part of SNCC. So they went Greenwood, Mississippi. Anyway, you can go study that on your own. But Diane Nash split once Stokely Carmichael's leadership started taking the organization away from the founding pillar of nonviolence. According to some historians, Nash's campaigns were among the most successful of the era. Her efforts included the first successful civil rights campaign to integrate lunch counters in Nashville, the Freedom Riders, who desegregated interstate travel, co-founding the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, co-initiating the Alabama Voting Rights Project, and working on the Selma Voting Rights Movement. This helped gain congressional passage of the Voting Rights Act in 1965, which authorized the federal government to oversee and enforce state policies and practices to ensure that African Americans and other minorities were not prevented from registering and voting. Diane Nash, a civil and human rights institution in the African American community, is still alive. She'll be 84 in a couple months, and so we salute her for her work. According to a biographical sketch on the National Women's History Museum website, Fannie Lou Hamer rose from humble beginnings in the Mississippi Delta to become one of the most important, passionate, and powerful voices of the civil and voting rights movement, and a leader in the efforts for greater economic opportunities for African Americans. Hamer was born on October 6, 1917, in Montgomery County, Mississippi. She was the 20th and last child of sharecroppers. She grew up in poverty, and at age 6, Hamer joined her family picking cotton. By age 12, she left school to work. In 1944, she married Perry Hamer, and the couple toiled on the Mississippi plantation owned by B.D. Marlowe until 1962. Because Hamer was the only worker who could read and write, she also served as a plantation timekeeper. In 1961, Hamer received a hysterectomy by a white doctor without her consent while undergoing surgery to remove a uterine tumor. Such forced sterilization of black women as a way to reduce the black population was so widespread it was dubbed a Mississippi appendectomy. Unable to have children of their own, the Hamers adopted 2 daughters. That summer, Hamer attended a meeting led by civil rights activist James Foreman of SNCC, aforementioned, and James Bevel of the SCLC, the husband of Diane Nash. Hamer was moved to act because of efforts to deny blacks the right to vote. She became a SNCC organizer, and on August 13, 1962, she led 17 volunteers to register to vote, denied the right to vote due to an unfair literacy test. The group was harassed on their way home when police stopped their bus and fined them $100 for the trumped-up charge that the bus, listen to this, was too yellow. That night, Marlowe fired Hamer for her attempt to vote. Her husband was required to stay until the harvest. Marlowe confiscated much of their property. The Hamers moved from their home with very little. In June 1963, after successfully completing a voter registration program in Charleston, South Carolina, Hamer and several other black women were arrested for sitting in a whites-only bus station restaurant in Mississippi. At the jailhouse, she and several of the women were brutally beaten, leaving Hamer with lifelong injuries from a blood clot in her eye, kidney damage, and leg damage. In 1964, Hamer's national reputation soared as she co-founded the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party, which challenged the local Democratic Party's effort to block black participation. Hamer and other MFDP members went to the Democratic National Convention that year, arguing to be recognized as the official delegation. When Hamer spoke before the Credentials Committee calling for mandatory integrated state delegations, President Lyndon Johnson held a televised press conference so that she would not get any television airtime, but her speech, with its poignant descriptions of racial prejudice in the South, was televised later. In 1964, Hamer helped organize Freedom Summer, which brought hundreds of college students, black and white, to help with African American voter registration in the segregated South. In 1964, she announced her own candidacy for the Mississippi House of Representatives, but was barred from the ballot. A year later, Hamer, Victoria Gray, and Annie Devine became the first black women to stand in the U.S. Congress when they unsuccessfully protested the Mississippi House election of 1964. In 1971, Hamer helped to found the National Women's Political Caucus. Frustrated by the political process, Hamer turned back to economics as a strategy for greater racial equality. In 1968, she began a, quote, pig bank to provide free pigs for black farmers to breed, raise, and slaughter. A year later, she launched the Freedom Farm Cooperative, buying up land that blacks could own and farm collectively, with the assistance of donors, including the famed singer Harry Belafonte, who was so instrumental in the movement for civil and human rights. She purchased 640 acres, that's a whole lot of land, and launched a coupe store, a boutique, and a sewing enterprise. She single-handedly ensured that 200 units of low-income housing were built. Many of them still exist today. The FFC lasted until the mid-70s. At its heyday, it was among the largest employers in Sunflower County. Executive travel and fundraising took Hamer away from the day-to-day operations, as did her failing health, and FFC folded. 1977, Hamer died of breast cancer at the age of 59. Again, today we gave you just a few very short summaries of each of these women. We could have went extensively into more detail on all of them. Each of them, Ella Baker, Diane Nash, Fannie Lou Hamer, were all willing to, just like Esther, sacrifice for the sake of what they believed to be right. During our after Bible study chat, I want to show a video of Fannie Lou Hamer and hear from you what you learned today. I want you to come on over and I want you to answer the week's question, okay? What did you learn about these women that we discussed in today's lesson? Download the Dialpad meeting app, y'all. Or just go to meetings.dialpad.com/SMZBC. And if you don't feel like doing that, just call 804-203-9011. If you're on Facebook, if you're on Twitter, if you're on YouTube, come on over. Not only do I want you to come over, but I also want you to participate. Not just listen, come on over and participate. What'd you learn about these women? Anything about their lives? Biblical story of Esther that may motivate you or encourage you during this season of Lent. Remember, tomorrow morning at 7 o'clock, we're on our prayer call, and every day at 1 o'clock, Monday through Saturday, we are praying. Stop what you do and pray. Stop what you're doing and pray. Stop what you're doing and pray. Friday, we're here feeding at 12:45, food pantry if you need groceries. Make it through the week. Stop through, see us. And then Sunday, we're here for worship, in person and virtual. All right. God bless you all. And let's get this party started. Jump on over and let's have this conversation.